simple roasted kabocha squash might be your new fall favorite. Head to your local farm and pick up this easy to prepare and delicious squash. Roast it simply to enjoy its natural flavor, or add it to my kabocha squash coconut curry. Hello, I'm Catherine. Bryan's behind the camera, and kabocha squash, or Japanese pumpkin, seems to be stealing the squash spotlight again this year. Our simple roasted kabocha squash recipe has been jumping into the top searches on our blog for the past couple weeks. So Bryan and I decided to head to a local farm, take in all the fall activities, and pick up a kabocha squash to show you how to prepare this at home. There are so many different squash varieties, and this one is trendy right now for good reason. You can eat the skin, so you don't even have to peel it. The flesh is velvety, it's sweet, and it tastes almost like chestnuts.
If your squash isn't velvety, you don't want it.
I love the flavor of this squash so much that I'm going to show you how to roast it really simply. To be honest, this isn't much of a recipe, but sometimes you just need to know how to cut a vegetable and what temperature to roast it at, right? But don't worry and hit that subscribe button, because I will walk you through how to make a delicious curry with your roasted kabocha squash if you're feeling a little more adventurous. You can see that kabocha squash is a deep green color and they're quite squat, so you'll be able to tell the difference from an acorn squash, for instance, which is shaped like an acorn. They do really vary in size, so this smaller one we got from our local farm and it's just over 2 pounds. I found larger ones from our local grocery store, and these are a little over 4 pounds. Regardless of its size though, you want a squash that feels heavy for its size, and that can indicate that it's not dried out. If you're making a soup, then you'll probably want a larger squash, but if you're making something like my curry or serving this as a side dish, then a smaller squash might be perfect. Now, how do you slice kabocha squash? A sharp knife is going to be your friend, and since you can eat the skin, give your squash a good wash and dry it off before slicing. Slice the squash from the stem to the base using a rocking motion. You don't need to try and slice through the stem. Once you have cut all the way around, you'll be able to pull the two halves apart and the stem will separate. Use a spoon to scoop out the seeds and stringy membrane. Flip the squash halves so the cavity faces the cutting board, and slice into half moons about 1 inch thick. Leave these as half moon slices or cube if desired. Remember to cut off the hard pieces from the stem and the base as well. If you don't think your knife or your muscles will be a match for the squash, then you can prick it a few times with a fork and microwave it for 2 to 3 minutes to soften the skin. If you do want to remove the skin, if you're making a soup for instance, then it will be easier to remove the skin once the squash is roasted, but if you want to toss it raw into a soup, then try to remove the skin when it's in those half moon slices. That might be most manageable because the skin of a kabocha squash isn't smooth like butternut, for instance. Speaking of butternut, you might know that I love roasting squash seeds, but kabocha squash seeds are pretty tough to chew. They're not the tastiest of the squash seeds. I do always roast them anyway, so if you'd like to as well, then separate them from this stringy membrane and toss the membrane in your vegetable scrap bag for homemade veggie broth, and then give the seeds a wash, dry them off really well, lay them on a baking tray, and sprinkle them with some oil, salt, pepper, and any other seasonings you like. To simply roast kabocha squash, lay the slices in a single layer on a baking tray lined with parchment paper or a silicone baking mat. Brush or toss the squash with a bit of olive oil and sprinkle with salt and pepper. This is really all the squash needs in my opinion. But if you want to add some extra sweetness, brush the slices with about 1 tablespoon maple syrup or another liquid sweetener. If you want to add more savory, salty flavor, brush the slices with about half a tablespoon tamari or soy sauce. Roast at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 minutes, turning the pieces halfway through. If you are roasting cubes, they will likely be done after just 20 minutes. The squash is done when you can easily slide a fork into the pieces and they are lightly browned. If desired, roast the seeds alongside the squash for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the cooking time until the seeds are nicely browned. To make my kabocha squash coconut curry, I saute half a small minced onion and 1 clove of minced garlic for 1 to 2 minutes. Season with salt and pepper. Add 1 sliced orange bell pepper and cook 2 minutes until slightly softened. Add 1½ cups chickpeas and the spices, 2 teaspoons curry powder, an 1/8 teaspoon nutmeg, and an 1/8 teaspoon cinnamon. Stir and add 400 ml canned coconut milk, 2 cups of vegetable broth, 2 tablespoons tamari or soy sauce, half a teaspoon chili garlic sauce for a dash of spice, and 1 small roasted kabocha squash or about 3 cups cubed. Raise the heat so the liquid comes to a light boil and reduce to a simmer for 5 minutes to combine all the flavors. Finish with a tablespoon of nutritional yeast for depth of flavor, half a tablespoon maple syrup or a pinch of cane sugar for balance, and 2 cups packed spinach for your greens. Serve with rice or soba noodles.
This is the perfect meal for today. It's so rainy and gray.
It's pouring.
So now we get a nice little curry made by you. This looks lovely.
Do you want to try the squash on its own first
Sure,
before we get
let's
the
do it.
curry flavor? I think this is the totally unflavored, just oil, salt, and pepper.
I think it's great. It's maybe not as sweet as other squashes or as like buttery, but it has a ton of flavor.
What does it taste like too?
Sort of nutty.
Yeah, I taste chestnuts.
Ooh, chestnuts. That's a
Like
good
the
one.
aftertaste is really chestnutty.
Yeah, that does taste exactly like chestnuts. That's a good call.
And the texture, what do you think?
It's not pasty, but it's like not as smooth again as butternut squash.
Yeah, it's not as creamy. I said velvety. It's often described as velvety.
Velvety. I don't know if I've ever
Had velvety food.
Food is velvety. Wow.
But that's kind of accurate, you know,
Heard
it's
it here first,
just
folks.
slightly textured. It leaves a little bit of a.
If your squash isn't velvety, you don't want it. Like,
When I tasted the smaller squash, it was quite a bit more pasty. The larger one is really smooth and velvety. Sometimes depending on the freshness of the squash. I don't know if smaller squash, bigger squash, if there's a difference there, but some people think that kabocha has a much drier, more pasty kind of texture, and this one definitely did. But usually I find it pretty velvety.
velvety. All right, now I'm excited to dig into this curry.
might wanna
'cause it's
spoon
so
it.
rainy out and yucky. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is so good. I kept getting hit with more and more flavors. There's so much depth to this recipe.
Yeah.
And this is delicious.
Can you taste the difference in the texture with this squash though? A little pastier.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to put it in a curry or in a soup if that's the case. If you're noticing that you maybe didn't get the best kabocha squash, then put it into something creamy.
I bet it would make a really good soup.
It would. I want to try it. I have a butternut squash red lentil soup, and I obviously have a lot of kabocha squash here, so I think we're gonna have that in the next couple days.
Farmer market sauce coming.
And if it ends up being really good, then maybe it'll be a new recipe up on the blog as well.
Maybe a video.
Yeah. We also have an acorn squash Thai green curry. So this is a Thai inspired kind of curry. And the difference between the two, the acorn squash one uses green curry paste. And the nice thing about this is that you don't need a curry paste. You can cobble it together with some of the spices you probably already have in your pantry. And you can use different vegetables in this. I often use bok choy and snow peas or bean sprouts. You can switch it up depending on what you have.
And we also have a recipe on the blog for just a simple acorn squash side.
Yeah, lots of maple syrup and buttery and
Yum.
yum.
This is so good. It tastes perfect on a rainy fall day.
Yeah. Did you have fun at the farm with all the fall activities?
I did, yeah. We pumpkin bowled, we went through a corn maze,
Pumpkin tic-tac-toe.
pumpkin tic-tac-toe. We lived.
Oh, we did.
How much does this cost? I don't know.
Well, the small kabocha squash that we got at the farm was just over 2 pounds, and that cost about $5.60. The larger one that I found from our local grocery store was actually just over $4. The curry, if I use my homemade broth and my chickpeas cooked from scratch, then I think it comes out to $10.65 or something like that. So just over $10.
For 4 servings.
Yeah, at least 4.
Yeah, it's
it makes
big.
quite a bit.
Yeah, it makes a lot. And the squash is the hero, so I think it's okay. You know, if you spend a little more on an extra velvety squash.
Support a local farmer.
Yeah.
But when they're in season, then look for them to be on special because they will go on special and then you can get a few.
I never would have thought of describing food like velvet. I'll have to remember the word velvet when we play Scrabble.
Yeah,
Tonight's a good Scrabble night.
it is.
You want to go Scrabble and cuddle?
He's so sweet. Yeah,
It's a
let's
good
grab
night for Scrabble. What is? What?
Goodbye.